Imagine standing on a strip of land so narrow that the sea roars at your left shoulder, while a wall of jagged cliffs towers over your right. The wind carries the smell of salt and iron. Ahead of you stretches an ocean of soldiers, rows upon rows of Persian warriors packed so densely that their banners blot out the horizon. You have 300 men. They have hundreds of thousands, and deep down, every man beside you understands the same unspoken truth. None of you are going home. Thermopylae is remembered as the greatest last stand in human history, a moment when bronze shields, human flesh, and unbreakable will held back the crushing weight of an empire. It has become a legend told in clean, heroic lines: the final battle, the brave king, the doomed warriors. But legends lie. They show you the climax soaked in blood, but they hide the darkness that forged the man who stood at the front of that line. Leonidas was not born a hero. He was manufactured, forged inside a society so terrified of its own population that it turned childhood itself into a battlefield. To understand Thermopylae, you must first understand Sparta. And Sparta was nothing like the Greece most people imagine. There were no philosophers debating beneath marble columns, no poets reclining beneath olive trees, no democratic assemblies arguing about freedom and beauty. Sparta was a fortress, a hardened military state carved into the rocky valleys of Laconia. At its top stood a tiny elite class known as the homoioi, the equals, full Spartan citizens trained only for war. Beneath them lay a vast population of enslaved agricultural laborers known as the Helots. And those slaves outnumbered their masters by terrifying margins. In some regions, there were 10 Helots for every Spartan citizen, every harvest the Spartans ate, every grain filling their storehouses, every meal on their tables, came from Helot hands, which meant the Spartans lived with a suffocating truth. If the Helots ever united, Sparta would vanish before sunset. So Sparta built a society based on fear, not the fear of enemies across the sea, but the fear of the people beneath their own feet. To control that fear, they created systems designed to produce something more than soldiers. They created killers. One of the most chilling institutions was the Krypteia. Officially, it was described as a form of secret police. In reality, it was something closer to a death squad. Teenage Spartan boys were handed knives and sent out into the countryside with almost no food. Their mission was simple: hunt. But they were not hunting foreign enemies. They were hunting Helots. Any slave who appeared strong, confident, or capable of leadership could be marked for death. These young Spartans stalked the countryside at night, moving silently through fields and villages. No trial, no warning, just sudden death in the dark. It served two purposes. It terrorized the Helot population into submission. And it taught Spartan boys something even more important: how to kill without hesitation. This was the world waiting for a child named Leonidas, around 540 BC. He was born into the Agead dynasty, one of Sparta's two royal bloodlines. Sparta had a strange system of kingship. Two kings ruled simultaneously, each from a different royal house. In theory, it prevented tyranny. In practice, it created constant tension and suspicion. Royal blood did not guarantee luxury. It guaranteed scrutiny. Leonidas's father, King Anaxandridas II, had several sons. The eldest was Cleomenes, heir to the throne. Because he was destined to become king, Spartan tradition shielded him from the worst brutality of the training system. The logic was ruthless but practical. You do not risk breaking the boy who will one day command your army. So Cleomenes grew up Spartan, but softened compared to the rest. The second son, Doriaeus, received no such protection. He was thrown into the full brutality of Spartan training. He starved, bled, froze, and endured every punishment meant to strip away weakness. He emerged hardened, proud, and increasingly resentful of the brother who would inherit the throne without earning it. And then there was Leonidas, the third son. the one nobody planned for. Under normal circumstances, he would never rule. At best, he might become a respected officer or commander. But that also meant something else. He received no special treatment. At 7 years old, exactly like every other Spartan boy expected to become a citizen, Leonidas was taken from his family and delivered to the Agoge. His mother could not stop it. His royal name could not protect him. The city swallowed him whole. The Agoge was not a school. It was not even a training camp. It was a years-long experiment in controlled suffering. Boys were divided into packs and housed in communal barracks. Each year they received exactly one cloak. That single piece of fabric served as their only clothing through blistering summers and freezing winters. They wore no shoes. They slept on mats made from reeds they gathered from riverbanks. If they failed to collect enough reeds, they slept directly on the frozen ground. Food was deliberately scarce. The boys received just enough to stay alive, but never enough to feel full. Hunger was part of the curriculum. They were expected to steal whatever else they needed to survive: bread, cheese, scraps of meat, anything. If they succeeded without being caught, they ate. If they were caught, they were beaten savagely, not because stealing was wrong, but because getting caught meant weakness. The message was carved into their bones: take what you need, do it silently, never complain. Older boys held absolute authority over the younger ones. That meant constant bullying, violence, and psychological domination disguised as discipline. The whip was everywhere. Public flogging rituals were held at religious shrines where boys were beaten until they collapsed. Adults stood nearby watching with approval. The goal was simple: pain must become meaningless. A Spartan was expected to endure anything without flinching, without crying, without speaking. And somewhere inside that brutal system stood a boy named Leonidas, a child who carried royal blood but received no privilege for it. No softer bed, no extra food, no escape from the beatings. He woke before dawn, ran until his lungs burned, wrestled, fought, and obeyed without question. Many boys broke. Some collapsed physically, others became hollow shells, obedient but empty. But the fragments of ancient history suggest Leonidas did something different. He adapted. Where others saw cruelty, he saw a test. Every scar became proof of endurance. Every freezing night hardened him further. Every empty stomach sharpened his discipline. And over time, he developed something Sparta valued above almost everything else: laconic speech. Spartans trained themselves to speak with brutal simplicity. Long explanations were weakness. Emotion was failure. A true Spartan spoke only when his words could strike harder than a spear. Leonidas mastered this philosophy completely. He became a man who could listen to an hour of argument and end it with a single sentence. By the time he reached adulthood, the world around him had begun to change. His father was aging. The question of succession was no longer theoretical. Around 520 BC, King Anaxandridas died. Cleomenes ascended the throne, and immediately the cracks in Sparta's system began to show. The most powerful man in Sparta had never endured the full brutality of the Agoge. Cleomenes could be brilliant. At times he was a master strategist and diplomat, but he was also unstable, impulsive, dangerous. Herodotus records episode after episode of reckless decisions, unauthorized military campaigns, political manipulations across Greece, rumors that he had even bribed the oracle at Delphi to remove Sparta's other king from power. Whether the accusation was true or not, the pattern was clear. Cleomenes believed rules applied to other people. Doriaeus watched all of this with growing fury. He had endured the Agoge. He had bled for Sparta. In his mind, he was the true Spartan, the one who deserved the throne. But the crown belonged to his brother. The resentment became unbearable. So Doriaeus made a decision Spartans despised above almost anything else. He left. He gathered followers and sailed away to carve out his own kingdom. First he tried Libya. When that failed, he turned towards Sicily, seeking land where he could rule without his brother's shadow. But Sicily was already claimed. Carthaginian power dominated the island. Dorieus marched straight into the jaws of another empire. He and most of his followers were destroyed in battle. The warrior who believed himself destined to rule died far from Sparta, chasing a throne that never existed. Leonidas stayed. He did not rebel. He did not flee. He watched, and he learned. He watched how an unstable king could damage Sparta from within. He watched how pride had driven his brother to a meaningless death. And quietly, patiently, the third son absorbed lessons no training system could teach. Lessons about power, patience, and survival. He had no idea that the path he remained on would eventually lead him to a narrow strip of land called Thermopylae, a place where the entire world would learn his name. Cleomenes did not collapse all at once. He unraveled in public slowly, like a rope fraying under strain, until the entire city could see the fibers snapping. At first, Sparta tolerated him because it had to. Kings were not removed lightly. They were blood, lineage, the old bones of the state. But Cleomenes kept pushing against law, against custom, against restraint, until even Sparta's patience broke. His behavior grew more extreme. Allies were driven away. Violence stopped serving strategy and began to feel random, almost hungry. The ephors, the 5 elected magistrates powerful enough to challenge kings, began to see him not as a flawed ruler, but as a threat to the stability of Sparta itself. And then they did something almost unthinkable. They declared him insane. For a Spartan king to be officially branded mad by his own government was political execution in everything but name. Cleomenes was seized, chained, and imprisoned like a dangerous animal. The man who inherited the throne without enduring the full weight of the Agoge now found himself stripped of dignity in front of the people he once commanded. What happened next is one of the most disturbing episodes in Spartan memory. The official story says Cleomenes persuaded a guard to give him a blade. Then, alone in his cell, he cut himself apart methodically until he bled to death. An image of madness so grotesque it still repulses. But the official story has always smelled like a convenience. A king that unstable, that politically toxic, would not be left alone with a sharp weapon unless someone wanted him dead. Many have suspected Sparta's own machine, the same system that raised him, quietly decided to remove him. Whatever the truth, the result was final. The first son died in disgrace. The second son died abroad in failure. And the third son, the one nobody planned for, was suddenly the only man left standing. Around 490 BC, Leonidas became king. Not through ambition, not through a coup, not through a clever conspiracy. He became king, the way Sparta made kings when it didn't choose them. He outlasted everyone ahead of him, and his timing could not have been worse. That same period saw the Persian Empire shifting from distant rumor to looming catastrophe. A decade earlier, Greek cities had tasted Persian power. They had watched Persia swallow Ionia. They had seen the empire's gold and ships and endless manpower. Then came Marathon. In 490 BC, Persian forces landed on the beaches of Attica to punish Athens and its allies. The Athenians, reinforced by a small Plataean contingent, did something that should have been impossible. They charged. They smashed into Persian lines and broke them. It became the most celebrated victory in Athenian history. To Athens, Marathon proved Persian power could bleed. To Persia, it was humiliation carved into imperial pride. Darius swore revenge. Death claimed him before he could deliver it. But his son Xerxes inherited more than a throne stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean shores. He inherited his father's rage. To Xerxes, Marathon was not a tactical setback. It was a personal insult to the title King of Kings. Over the following years, he began assembling something the ancient world had never witnessed: a force of staggering scale, a migrating empire of soldiers, engineers, servants, ships, animals, and supply trains, designed to crush Greece until the very idea of resistance vanished. While Xerxes built bridges across seas and summoned conscripts from dozens of subject nations, Leonidas governed Sparta with a steadiness completely unlike his predecessor. He cooperated with the ephors instead of trying to outmaneuver them. He followed law. He measured decisions. His training had made him cautious, but also decisive when the moment demanded it. Sparta did not need a gambler. It needed a man who could stare into impossible odds without flinching, and Leonidas did not stand alone. Spartan women were raised differently than most of Greece. They were expected to be strong, sharp-minded, and fearless. Leonidas's wife, Gorgo, was famous even in her own lifetime for intelligence and perception. One story preserved by Herodotus shows exactly how crucial she was. A Spartan exile living at the Persian court, almost certainly Demaratus, the deposed king, needed to warn Sparta. Xerxes was preparing a massive invasion, but a normal message would be intercepted and the sender executed. So he devised a method that was almost absurd in its simplicity. He took a writing tablet, scraped off all the wax, carved his warning directly into the wood beneath, then coated it again with fresh wax so it appeared blank. When the tablet arrived in Sparta, officials examined it and found nothing. They suspected a trick or a meaningless gesture. It was Gorgo who saw through the emptiness. "Remove the wax," she told them. Beneath it, scratched into the wood, was the truth that changed everything. Xerxes is coming. As Xerxes' preparations became impossible to hide, Persia shifted from secret buildup to open intimidation. Ambassadors fanned out across Greece carrying one demand: earth and water. The ancient symbols of total submission. Your land belongs to us. Your lives belong to us. You exist at the pleasure of the King of Kings. Many Greek cities surrendered. Thessaly submitted. Others bent the knee quietly, choosing survival over resistance. Opposing Persia looked like madness. Why sacrifice everything for something abstract like freedom when you could kneel and keep breathing beneath the empire's shadow? Then the ambassadors arrived in Sparta. They repeated the demand: earth and water. There were customs even in war. Killing envoys was considered barbarism. Messengers were supposed to be untouchable, a fragile thread connecting two sides before violence consumed everything. Sparta severed that thread. The story tells us the Persian envoys were brought before Spartan authorities. They spoke their demand. The Spartans listened, then offered a response dripping with contempt. "If you want earth and water from Sparta," they said, "you can collect it yourselves." Then they dragged the ambassadors to a deep well. "You will find all the earth and water you need at the bottom." And they threw them in. It was not merely refusal, it was deliberate, irreversible provocation. Sparta had not just rejected Xerxes, it had humiliated him and murdered his representatives. There would be no diplomacy after that, only war. Fear spread across Greece like disease. If Persia arrived at full strength and the Greek cities remained divided, they would be crushed one by one. Athens, Corinth, Thebes, every city argued, accused, panicked. But underneath the shouting was one reality they could not escape. Only one Greek state possessed a land army disciplined enough to stand toe-to-toe with Persian infantry: Sparta. And one of the sharpest minds in Greek history, Themistocles of Athens, proposed a strategy built on geography, not hope. Greece would not fight Persia everywhere. It would choose choke points. At sea, the Greek fleet would lure Persia into narrow straits where numbers became a liability. On land, the Persian army would be forced into a bottleneck so tight only a fraction could fight at once. One location screamed from every map and scout report: Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow coastal pass squeezed between steep cliffs and the sea on the northern edge of central Greece. At its tightest points, the pass was barely wide enough for a handful of men to stand abreast. If heavily armored hoplites locked shields there, Persia's vast numbers would be strangled. The empire would be forced to feed men into the gap like flesh into a grinder. Leonidas understood immediately. He also understood the risk. If Thermopylae fell quickly, there would be nothing to stop Persia from pouring into Greece. Athens would burn. The Peloponnese would be exposed. Leonidas agreed to lead the land force north. But to do it properly, he needed Sparta's full army, the professional corps that could hold any line. He went to the ephors to request mobilization, and he hit a wall harder than any Persian shield. The timing coincided with the Krypteia, one of Sparta's most sacred festivals dedicated to Apollo. Spartan law forbade major military campaigns during it. The gods came first. Violating that rule was not just illegal, it was an invitation for divine punishment. So the ephors refused. The army would stay home. A force large enough to erase Greece from the world was assembling, and Sparta's own laws froze its military in place. Religious duty on one side, survival on the other. It should have destroyed them. But Leonidas was a product of the Agoge. He did not waste energy punching immovable stone. He looked for a way around it. The law forbade the full army from marching. It said nothing about the king traveling with his personal guard. Sparta maintained an elite royal bodyguard. 300 hand-picked warriors, the finest soldiers in a state built entirely for war. Leonidas returned to the ephors with a different proposal. He would not mobilize the army. He would take his 300 north as an advance force. Technically, not a campaign, just a preliminary deployment. The ephors, trapped by their own law and terrified of appearing passive while Greece burned, approved. Some may have believed reinforcements would follow once the festival ended. Leonidas almost certainly knew they would not arrive in time. Then he made one final requirement that exposed the true nature of the mission. Only men who already had living sons could join the 300. On the surface, it sounded like cold administration. In truth, it was a death sentence written in policy. Leonidas did not believe these men were coming home. He intended their bloodlines to survive even if their bodies did not. This was not a heroic gamble for victory. It was a calculated sacrifice from the beginning. Spartan farewells carried no softness. Women were raised to see cowardice as worse than death. There was an old instruction spoken as a mother placed a heavy bronze shield into her son's hands. With it or on it. Return with your shield in victory, or be carried home dead upon it. Dropping the shield to run meant abandoning honor. Before Leonidas marched north, his last recorded exchange with Gorgo captured Spartan brutality with painful precision. She did not beg him to stay. She asked what she should do after he was gone. His answer was brief, practical, stripped of sentiment. Marry a good man, have good children, not a love letter, a final order. The 300 assembled in crimson cloaks, bronze-faced shields gleaming, spears like a forest of points. Allied contingents joined as they moved north. But before Leonidas stepped toward the place he expected to die, he traveled to Delphi to consult the oracle of Apollo. There, the Pythia delivered a prophecy recorded by Herodotus, a prophecy that did not offer hope, only terms. Either Sparta would be destroyed by the invaders, or one of its kings, descended from Heracles, would fall. The city could be saved only through the death of a king. For most men, that would feel like a noose tightening. For Leonidas, forged by decades of obedience to forces larger than himself, it was clarity. The uncertainty was gone. His death was not a possibility. It was a requirement. Thermopylae stopped being a military assignment and became something closer to a ritual offering. Leonidas was walking toward the altar, and he knew it. When the Greek forces finally assembled at Thermopylae, reality arrived with cold disappointment. On paper, the defenders were supposed to be a powerful coalition: Spartans, Peloponnesians, Phocians, Locrians, and contingents from cities across Greece. a united army standing shoulder to shoulder against Persia. In truth, fear had already hollowed the alliance. Some cities sent token forces instead of their full armies. Others delayed endlessly. Some simply stayed home. When Leonidas counted the men available to defend the pass, the number settled at roughly 7,000. 7,000 against the greatest army the world had ever seen. But the terrain itself was their ally. Thermopylae was a corridor carved by nature into the Greek coastline. On one side, steep mountains rose like stone walls. On the other, the sea pressed inward. In the narrowest sections, only a handful of soldiers could stand side by side. The Phocians had once built a defensive wall across the pass. Time had left it broken and crumbling. Leonidas ordered it rebuilt. Behind that low stone barrier, rows of hoplites assembled, bronze shields overlapping, spears angled forward. If the Persian army wanted Greece, it would have to bleed for every step. Scouts moved north and returned shaken. What they had seen was not an army, it was an empire on the move. Soldiers from every corner of Xerxes' dominion, Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, warriors from distant Asian provinces, cavalry units, endless infantry columns, engineers, servants, supply trains stretching beyond the horizon. The dust alone darkened the sky. Herodotus claimed the army numbered in the millions. Modern estimates place it closer to 200,000. But standing on that narrow road, watching the approaching haze swallow the horizon, numbers stopped meaning anything. It was simply more soldiers than anyone had ever seen. When Xerxes arrived and surveyed the Greek position, the sight must have been baffling. The Spartans were not panicking. They were not reinforcing their wall in desperation. According to surviving accounts, many of them were calmly grooming their long hair, combing it carefully before battle. To the Persians, it must have looked like madness. Xerxes waited. Surely once the Greeks understood the scale of the army facing them, they would scatter. They did not move. Days passed. Finally, Xerxes sent a messenger forward. The offer was simple. Lay down your weapons, submit. You will be allowed to live. It was the last chance at survival delivered with the weight of the largest army in history behind it. Leonidas listened. Then he answered with two words that would echo through centuries. Molon Labe. Come and take them. There would be no negotiation, no surrender. The line had been drawn at the hot gates. Xerxes gave the order. Send the first wave. The mountain corridor became a slaughterhouse. The first troops pushed into the pass were expendable units, Medes and other subject soldiers driven forward by officers wielding whips. Their orders were simple: overwhelm the wall, crush the defenders. They advanced in dense ranks, shouting, shields raised. Then they collided with the phalanx. The Greek formation was not a loose crowd of fighters. It was a machine. Hoplites locked shields into an unbroken wall of bronze. Behind the front rank, the second and third rows thrust their spears over shoulders. To the Persians, it looked like a living fortress, a wall of metal sprouting a forest of spear points. The Persian soldiers wore lighter armor, leather, cloth, wicker shields. Against Greek bronze and long spears, it meant almost nothing. Spears stabbed forward again and again, faces, throats, chests. Men fell before they could even strike back. Leonidas fought in the front line. A Spartan king did not command from safety. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his warriors, shouting short commands above the clash of metal and screams of the dying. Then he gave the order every Spartan had learned since childhood: push. The rear ranks leaned forward with all their weight. The force surged through shields and armor like a physical wave. The Persian front collapsed. Men stumbled over the bodies of their own dead. Soldiers behind them couldn't see what was happening, yet officers kept driving them forward. Step by step, they were fed into the same narrow corridor of death. Bodies piled so quickly they became part of the battlefield itself. The Greeks used them as footing. When the front line grew tired, Leonidas' men rotated positions, fresh hoplites stepping forward while exhausted ones slipped back. The wall never broke. The Persians had no such system. They simply marched until they died. Wave after wave slammed into the Greek line. Wave after wave shattered. By the end of the first day, the Persians had gained nothing. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, lay dead. Greek casualties were minimal. The defenders withdrew calmly behind their wall at dusk, repairing armor, binding wounds, sharpening spears. The machine kept working. On the second day, Xerxes lost patience. He committed his most elite force, the Immortals, 10,000 of the Persian Empire's finest infantry. They were called Immortals because their number never dropped. Every fallen soldier was immediately replaced. They had crushed enemies across continents. They marched into Thermopylae confident the battle would end quickly. Instead, they met the same immovable wall. The narrow terrain strangled their advantage. Only the soldiers at the front could fight. Greek spears still outranged their weapons. Bronze still crushed wicker and leather. Leonidas even baited them with a feigned retreat, pulling his line back in perfect order. The Persians surged forward, believing the Greeks were finally breaking. Then the Spartans reversed direction and slammed back into them. Spears punched through armor. Shields smashed skulls. The narrow road became a butcher's floor. Herodotus claims Xerxes leapt from his throne in fury as he watched the slaughter unfold. Whether the detail is literal or not, the truth remains. The King of Kings had unleashed his best warriors, and they were dying in piles before a few thousand Greeks. By nightfall of the second day, nothing had changed. The pass still held. Xerxes needed another solution, and it arrived in the form of a man named Ephialtes. He was no warrior, no noble, just a local Greek who knew the mountains. He came to the Persian camp with an offer. For gold, favor, and protection, he would reveal a hidden path through the hills, the Thermopylae Trail. It wound over the mountain ridge behind the Greek position. If Persian forces used that route, they could descend behind Leonidas and trap the defenders between two armies. It was exactly what Xerxes needed. That night, a Persian column led by the general Hydarnes began climbing the mountain under Ephialtes' guidance. Leonidas knew the path existed. He had stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers there to guard it. Their orders were simple: hold the trail. But the Phocians were not Spartans. When they heard the sound of thousands of armored soldiers climbing through the dark forest, fear spread through their ranks. Instead of blocking the path and forcing the Persians to fight uphill, they withdrew to higher ground. Hydarnes ignored them. He left a small force to keep them pinned and continued down the trail. The trap closed. At dawn on the third day, the news reached the Greek camp. Persian troops were descending behind them. Thermopylae was no longer a defensive position. It was a cage. The Greek commanders gathered around Leonidas. Their options were brutal: retreat and abandon the pass, try to break through the Persian army ahead of them, or stay and die. Leonidas remembered the prophecy from Delphi. Either Sparta would fall, or a Spartan king must die. He made his decision. Most of the Greek army would withdraw. They would carry the warning south. The rear guard would stay. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, 700 warriors from the small city of Thespiae, refused to leave as well. They understood their homes lay directly in the path of the Persian advance. They chose to die beside the Spartans. 400 Thebans were also held at the pass, less as trusted allies and more as hostages. When the sun rose on the third day, roughly 1,000 men remained. They knew exactly what awaited them. Leonidas gave his final order: eat well. Tonight we dine in Hades. Instead of waiting behind the wall, he led the defenders forward into the wider section of the pass. If they were going to die, they would die moving. They charged. The battle exploded into savage chaos. Greek spears shattered from repeated impacts. Warriors drew short swords and hacked through Persian ranks. The Thespians fought beside the Spartans with the same desperate ferocity. The road turned into a landscape of broken shields, severed limbs, and choking dust. Somewhere in the fury, Leonidas fell. No dramatic speech survives, no clear description of the fatal blow. But when the king died, the Spartans did not retreat. They fought over his body. Persian soldiers surged forward to seize the corpse, a trophy for Xerxes. The Spartans formed a ring and killed anyone who came near. 4 assaults were thrown back. 2 of Xerxes' own brothers died in the struggle. But the Persian numbers were endless. Gradually, the defenders were forced back to a small hill behind the pass. There they made their final stand, spears gone, shields shattered, armor torn. They fought with swords, daggers, stones, even bare hands. Xerxes watched the scene and finally gave the order that ended it. Archers forward, thousands of bows lifted, the sky darkened with arrows. When the volleys ended, the hill was silent. The Spartans were dead. The Thespians were dead. Thermopylae belonged to Persia, but victory came at a staggering cost. Ancient sources speak of tens of thousands of Persian dead, all for 3 days, all for one narrow pass. Xerxes found Leonidas's body among the corpses. Instead of honoring it according to the customs of war, he chose rage. Leonidas's head was cut off, mounted on a stake, displayed for the army, but the act achieved the opposite of what Xerxes intended. Across Greece, the story spread like wildfire. A king who walked knowingly to his death, 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, 1,000 men who stood against the greatest empire on earth. Thermopylae was lost, but the story had been born, and that story changed everything. Because while Xerxes marched south, Athens was evacuating its people. The Greek fleet was gathering, and soon in the narrow waters of Salamis, the Persian navy would be destroyed. A year later, at Plataea, the Persian army would be crushed. The empire that seemed unstoppable would retreat, and at the center of the legend would remain a narrow pass, a pile of bones beneath a small hill, and a Spartan king who chose to die there rather than step aside. Centuries later, travelers still pass a monument near Thermopylae. Its inscription is simple: "Stranger, go tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws." Leonidas did not win the battle, but he won something far more powerful: the story. And stories can outlive empires.